The issue for Donald Trump is as follows, and I think this is what's most important for him to keep in mind. And his instincts are good. If he follows his instincts, he'll be fine. He needs to stop listening to the people around him. Number one, any war that breaks out today involving the United States and Russia, and whether or not Russia, we want it to be involved, Russia is involved in the Middle East. Russia is involved in Eastern Europe. Whatever happens, the war will expand. We will end up with multiple enemies arrayed against us. China, BRICS in general, and certainly Iran and other states in the Middle East. So the first thing is all wars will expand. So don't start one under any circumstances. It will expand out of control. The second thing is he's going to discover the hard way that we are grossly overstretched and overextended. The American military establishment is in no position to fight any kind of long war. Remember, we used to talk about the long war that we were supposed to fight? That was all nonsense. If you look at all of the simulations that involve us against Iran or us against any number of great powers, they all end in 2 weeks. Well, why does the war end in 2 weeks? Because in 2 weeks, we've exhausted everything that we've got. There's no more ammunition. There are no more missiles, no more rockets. I would say, in truth, right now, it's closer to 1 week, maybe 10 days. And we don't have this scientific industrial base with manufacturing capability that is humming along 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We can't match Russia, a nation of 140 million? Imagine that economic base producing in China. China is in a position today that we were in during World War II and in the aftermath. We were the productivity giant across the world. That's China. So you can't go to war with these people. You'll be buried by them with conventional weapons and ammunition. And anyone who thinks a nuclear exchange makes sense deserves to be shipped off to the nearest asylum. And I think Trump understands that. So those first two things, anything that we do expands out of control. Secondly, we're overstretched, overextended. Our forces are tired. They're very exhausted. The naval forces in particular have a lot of problems. Not just them, but they're the ones that are sitting out there on the front line right now. And then on top of that, you have the Air Force. And the Air Force cannot field thousands and thousands of fighters and bombers. We lost 18,000 bombers trying to penetrate German air defenses during World War II. We in the Royal Air Force. 18,000 bombers. Air defenses today in Iran are substantial, and they are capable. This is the S-400. They are layered with multiple kinds of missiles over a vast area and radars. We are going to lose aircraft. No one knows how many because we've never fought our way through it. But we don't have thousands to lose. So in an attrition setting, we can't win. And unfortunately, when you're 6,000 miles away from home, it's attrition. You can't replace rapidly. You can't reload rapidly. You can't resupply rapidly. Logistically, it's a disaster. Then finally, you see what's happened in the market recently. Dropped 900 points. What do you think happens if there's a war in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe? It'll just intensify the sell-off. Everything tanks. All confidence will be lost. No one in their right mind at this point should be talking about a war. We should be talking about disengagement. And Zelensky, frankly, the way he was treated, I think President Trump was far too gentle. I'm surprised that two giant Secret Service agents did not come in, pick him up, and remove him from the office. But the way he handled Zelensky is the way he's got to handle Netanyahu. Because if he doesn't, Netanyahu will drag him into the abyss. Because he wants this war in the Middle East come hell or high water. And it's not in their interest.
What war?
The war with Iran, the war with everybody. I mean, you've seen these settings where Netanyahu sits at a table and he's got everybody around him in his cabinet. And he says, this is our opportunity to settle with everyone. We're fighting on 5 fronts. No, we're fighting on 7 fronts. And he starts ticking off, everyone from the Houthis to the militias in Iraq and Syria and now Iran and so forth. If you look at the map today, he's trying to occupy Syria all the way up to the edge of Damascus. And Erdogan, who is a very clever but slippery character, has already said, forget it. We're not going to tolerate that in southern Syria. So he's pushing the envelope to the very edge. In Damascus, there are three great Islamic cities in the region. One is Cairo, the other is Jerusalem, and then Damascus. They're not going to surrender Damascus to the Israelis. So whatever happens, the Turks will eventually become involved. They'll march in.
So, I mean, that creates a kind of structural problem because Turkey is a member of NATO.
I don't think so, because I don't think NATO matters.
Maybe you're right.
I don't think it has for a long time.
Well, it matters in a material sense. We just use the name NATO to wage a war against Russia for 3 years that we lost.
Yeah.
So, but that would be the end of NATO, right?
Well, what we're talking about will end everything that we're accustomed to, the rules-based order, which just means our global hegemony in military and economic terms. Everyone in BRICS is now being forced together. We're forcing cohesion on BRICS as an alternative to our financial system, which we use to bully everybody. So that's all that BRICS is about. But now BRICS is going to become increasingly militarized because we're seen as this rogue state that is willing to put everything at risk in order to retain its position of dominance. That's catastrophic for us. We don't want to go down that road. And that's why I think most of us voted for President Trump. We saw him as someone who would say no and diverge from that path. But we don't know right now. It's not clear. He has not made it clear what he wants. He has said he wants a settlement with Russia. He wants normalization with Russia. Okay, if you really want that, you've got to act in a way that demonstrates conclusively that you support that. That means end all the military aid right now to the Ukrainians. Period. Done. Number two, get all of the Americans out of Ukraine immediately. Everybody. Intelligence, civilians, contractors. I mean, this has been another contracting bonanza in Ukraine, just as Afghanistan was.
And Iraq. Do you think at the Pentagon, you no longer work at the Pentagon, but if you were to, spend a week there talking to people off the record, like what would be the level of support for new wars?
Well, first of all, remember that your general officer corps is different from the rest of the officer corps. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't lots of full colonels out there who are desperate to be generals. And so they'll try to provide you with the answer they think is most likely to get them promoted. Okay.
Right.
But when you go into the general officer corps at the 3- and 4-star level, they have been conditioned for decades to look for trouble, literally. Right. In other words, go out and find a reason why we need Central Command.
Right.
We need Africa Command. We need European Command. We need Pacific Command. Now we call it Indo-Pacific. Insane. When I was sitting over at the National Defense University before I retired, they came over and said, well, we're going to have Africa Command. And I looked at, and Abizade at the time was the J5. I said, why? I mean, how would you feel if you're an African? Well, the United States military has now created a command and calls it Africa Command. How's that good for Africa? Are you planning on invading, I mean, having been to Africa, the last thing Africans need is a column of U.S. or British or French troops marching through the neighborhood. It's a disaster. They have enough violence and problems there. We don't need to add to it. I think President Trump wants to get rid of Africa Command. We don't need most of these. We should have 4. We should have Northern Command, Pacific Command, Southern Command, and Atlantic Command. That's it. You know why? Because that's all we need. You know why we have all these commands? This all emerged as a result of the Second World War. Because you needed layered commands over distance to communicate.
Right.
I mean, if you take a drive out to Kansas, one of my favorite states, and I was stationed at both Leavenworth and Fort Riley. Why is Fort Riley where it is from Fort Leavenworth? Because it takes exactly 1 day on horseback to ride from Fort Leavenworth to Fort Riley. And that was important 130, 140 years ago because you had Arapahoes and Comanches and other people that could interfere with you. So you had to be able to get somewhere to reinforce or support someone else. That's gone. We don't have to do that now. You can have instantaneous communications almost anywhere in the world if you want it immediately. You can have visibility of everything thanks to the satellite arrays that we have of everything. You don't have to have commands for every region in the world. And we don't have to strive for global military hegemony. What we need to do is be resolute in the defense of our country here in the Western Hemisphere.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.